They called him El Libertador, the Liberator. It was a title earned in blood and fire, forged on battlefields from the Caribbean to the heights of the Andes, from the plains of Venezuela to the ancient streets of Lima. Simon Bolívar was born into a world of colonial certainty, where Spanish kings ruled half the globe and the very idea of independence seemed like madness. Yet this slender man with burning eyes would become the sword that cut through 300 years of empire, the voice that awakened a sleeping continent, and the visionary who dared to imagine South America free and united. On a humid July night in 1783, in the heart of Caracas, Venezuela's wealthiest city, a child entered the world destined to shake it to its foundations. The Bolívar family possessed everything the Spanish colonial system could offer. Wealth beyond measure, vast estates, silver mines, and a bloodline that traced back to Spanish nobility. Young Simon would never want for material comfort. But fate, cruel and unrelenting, had other plans. By the age of 9, both his parents had died, leaving the boy orphan to a fortune and heir to a legacy he did not yet understand. The deaths planted something dark and driven in his soul, a hunger that gold could never satisfy. His tutor, the revolutionary thinker Simón Rodríguez, recognized the fire in the boy. Beneath the ceiba trees of Venezuela, amid the lush gardens of privilege, Rodríguez filled young Bolívar's mind with dangerous ideas: Rousseau's social contract, Voltaire's mockery of kings, the Enlightenment's promise that men could govern themselves. These were seeds of revolution planted in the most fertile ground imaginable, the mind of a young aristocrat who had everything to lose and nothing to fear. At 16, Bolívar traveled to Europe, to Madrid, the beating heart of the Spanish Empire. There, amid the glittering balls and gilded palaces, he saw the source of his homeland's oppression. He also found love. Maria Teresa del Toro became his bride when he was just 19, and for 8 brief months, he knew the simple joy of being a young man in love. They returned to Venezuela together, planning a life of domestic happiness. Then yellow fever struck. In his arms, Maria Teresa died, and with her died the last innocence of Simon Bolívar. He would never marry again. He made a vow over her grave that would consume the rest of his life. He would transform his personal grief into the liberation of millions. In Rome, on Monte Sacro, the sacred mount where ancient republicans once stood, Bolívar fell to his knees before his old tutor and swore an oath that echoed across centuries. He would not rest until every chain of Spanish tyranny was broken, until South America stood free, or he died trying. It was 1805, and he was 22 years old. The oath would take 25 years, cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and ultimately break him. The first attempts at independence came almost gently. In 1810, Venezuelan Creoles, American-born Spaniards, politely asked the colonial authorities to step aside. For a moment, it seemed possible. But nature itself seemed to curse the revolution. On March 26, 1812, a catastrophic earthquake leveled Caracas, killing tens of thousands. Priests declared it God's judgment against rebellion. Standing in the rubble, Bolívar seized a priest by the collar and shouted words that became legend: "If nature opposes us, we will fight against it and make it obey us." But earthquakes were only the beginning. Spanish loyalists and rogue armies tore the First Republic apart. Francisco de Miranda, the old revolutionary hero, was betrayed and captured. Bolívar himself participated in Miranda's arrest, a decision that would haunt him forever: the cruel calculus of survival over honor. Defeated and exiled, Bolívar could have retreated into his remaining wealth, lived comfortably in Caribbean exile, and let others wage impossible wars. Instead, he wrote. His Manifesto of Cartagena analyzed the Republic's failure with surgical precision and laid out a new strategy. Then he acted. With just 500 men, he launched the admirable campaign in May 1813, a lightning war that swept across Venezuela in 6 weeks of relentless victories. In Trujillo, he issued the decree of war to the death: Spaniards would be shown no mercy, but all Americans who supported independence would be welcomed. It was total war, brutal and absolute. By August, he entered Caracas in triumph, pulled through the streets in a carriage drawn by young women, flowers raining from windows, crowds chanting his new title, El Libertador. He was 30 years old and master of Venezuela. The glory lasted exactly 1 year. José Tomás Boves, a Spanish merchant who commanded the fierce Llanero plainsmen, launched a counter-revolution of stunning savagery. These mounted warriors of the Venezuelan plains fought with a hatred that matched Bolivar's own. By July 1814, Bolivar was fleeing Caracas again, leading 10,000 refugees on a death march east. Many died on the road. Bolivar escaped by sea, defeated for the second time. In Jamaica, hunted and nearly assassinated, he wrote his greatest political document, the Jamaica Letter, a prophetic vision of South America's future that predicted the challenges of independence with eerie accuracy. He warned that military glory would not automatically create stable republics, that regional divisions would threaten unity, that the transition from colony to nation would be long and bloody. He was describing his own future. Alexander Pétion, president of Haiti, gave Bolivar the lifeline he needed. The Black Republic, itself born from slave revolution, provided ships, arms, and money. Pétion asked only one price, that Bolivar free the slaves. It was a promise that would cost Bolivar support among his own aristocratic class, but he kept it. In 1816, he returned to Venezuela for the third time and immediately began freeing enslaved people who joined his cause. It was both moral necessity and military genius. He turned Spain's human property into his army of liberation. From 1817 to 1819, Bolivar built a new strategy. He established a headquarters at Angostura on the Orinoco River, created a functioning government, attracted British and Irish veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, and planned the impossible, an assault on New Granada, modern Colombia, by crossing the Andes Mountains during the rainy season. His generals thought him mad. Hannibal had crossed the Alps, Bolivar would cross higher, wetter, colder mountains with a smaller army and worse supplies. In June 1819, 2,500 men, along with horses and cattle, began the ascent. They climbed into clouds, into freezing rain, into altitudes where men gasped for breath and horses collapsed. At the Paramo of Pispa, 13,000 feet above the sea, the temperature plunged below freezing. Soldiers froze to death in their sleep. Horses died by the hundreds. But Bolivar kept pushing, kept encouraging, kept moving forward. When they descended into the green valleys of New Granada, they had lost a third of their force. But they had accomplished the impossible. The Spanish never expected them. At the bridge of Boyaca on August 7, 1819, Bolivar's exhausted army destroyed the Spanish force in 3 hours of furious combat. 3 days later, Bolivar entered Bogotá as liberator of New Granada. He had crossed uncrossable mountains and won an unwinnable war. It was the turning point. From this moment forward, Spanish power in South America was doomed. Bolivar united